Welcome to Holistically Speaking. I'm Hilary Russo, certified holistic health coach and health and wellness journalist. This is an empowering place to explore self-awareness, self-love, and transformation through health, healing, and humor. By sharing life-changing experiences, knowledge, and guests with varied expertise, we'll explore who we are, how we got that way, and what it takes to be a happy and healthy grown-up. Mind, body, and spirit. I'm glad you're here. About 10 years ago, I picked up a book that I thought would be a game changer when it came to relationships. It required lots of journaling and self-reflection, and I was totally digging it. The problem was, I wasn't ready for all of the messages that were stemming from my own mess. My trauma self was confused with my true self, and I was still quite incomplete with my past. But back then, 3 or 4 chapters in, something happened. I met the one. Or so I thought. So guess what I did? I put the book down and I called my relationship goals a success. I thought I had all the knowledge and all the know-how. Not so much. I know that now because, well, what a difference a decade makes. I picked up the book again about a year ago, and this time I understood the message because I gave myself that in-between time, that space each and every one of us needs to heal and become who we truly want to be for ourselves and in love. Look, it's not a book that's going to change your life. You change your life, but you have to be willing to ask yourself some really uncomfortable questions. And it comes with setting an intention, manifesting, and declaring what you really desire. What do you want in your life? Who do you want in your life? That's the message I was missing the first time I read Calling in the One. And clearly, years later, when the author's next book, Conscious Uncoupling, came about, a term that put Katherine Woodward Thomas on the map when Gwyneth Paltrow and Chris Martin split, Katherine showed us she knew what she was talking about. The real question is, are you ready to listen? So, on this episode of Holistically Speaking, author and licensed marriage and family therapist Katherine Woodward Thomas shares more about what it truly means to move from wishing and hoping to being part of the miracle of love and having a greater understanding when it comes to calling in the one. Katherine, it is really a pleasure to have you on Holistically Speaking. I have to say that I feel like I've known you for the last 10 years because I picked up your book, Calling in the One, back in 2011, maybe it was, and started reading it because, when we're out of a relationship or we're having difficulty in relationships, we're always looking for something to be the guide by our side, literally and figuratively. And I found that the book was really helpful because of how it was written, but also because you shared your own beautiful story,
Yeah.
So
Well, and by the way, the book came out in 2004, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. So the book
Mhm.
company back then, if you were a licensed professional, you were not supposed to talk about yourself. And they
Mm.
argued with me. And I'm so grateful I pushed back. I was like, no, I think people learn from stories and we share our stories with each other.
Mhm.
And that's how we really grow. It's not some professional comes and tells you what you should be doing and shouldn't be doing.
And that's what we see more and more these days, especially with social media, especially with it being a place where so many people are sharing their stories online because it allows us to connect.
Exactly.
And it doesn't mean you have to spill your beans online, which some people do, right? It doesn't
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be your diary, but it definitely allows us to look like, you know what? We're human. We've all been through something.
Yeah.
So to just sit there and tell me your thoughts, I guess that kind of therapy is not as popular.
Well, you're absolutely right. It is the way that we learn.
Mhm.
It's from the modeling of each other. And the book is not, let me tell you all my unhealed wounds.
Mhm.
I'm not using, we don't want to use each other to process our pain. But
Mhm.
I think that all of us are holding incredible amounts of wisdom from what we've
Mhm.
been through. And truthfully, I became a therapist kind of from the inside out. I was just working on myself so much that it just unfolded in that direction. Because I'm always one of those people, and I suspect you are too, that when I learn something, I want to help someone else. I want to pay it forward, and so that's really how I became a teacher from the beginning. So, but calling in the one is my own story. I did struggle with love for decades. I had a lot of relational trauma when I was a kid. It's not hard to kind of connect the dots and trace it back for most of us where our troubles come from. And we're all pretty sophisticated in being able to analyze who did what to us when and how it happened and where it happened and how we feel about what happened and all that stuff. But I think that what we're really interested in is, how do I create a future that's different than the past?
Mm, mm.
How do I
Yeah.
do that? How do I actually create outside of that old, well worn story? And calling in the one is about how I did that after decades of kind of patterns with unavailable men. And I was a magnet for married men. We all have our kind of mysterious patterns that seem to
Mhm.
follow us everywhere we go. And as I said, I was already a therapist by that time. So it wasn't that I didn't know myself, but what I discovered in my early 40s was the power of standing for a future that is a complete departure from your past. And instead of endlessly analyzing your past, of actually turning your attention towards that future. And in particular, asking yourself, who will I need to become in
Mm.
order for that future to happen, and to begin to consciously grow yourself in the direction of who you will need to be in order for that future not just to manifest, but to then sustain over time.
Yeah. And I think as we grow, it becomes less important what happened and the other person's part in it, and more about how can I be better? What is the lesson for me to learn in the growth? Because a lot of times, as we had been chatting about before we were recording, is that we go into that victim mode sometimes, which there's a process, right? We feel sad, we feel upset, we feel angry, we go through those stages. But what lesson can I learn from this? And I love how you said the power in standing in the completeness of it. So
Yeah,
it's that growth to graduation you mentioned,
yeah, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think the conclusions that some of us come to are limiting
Mm,
conclusions that kind of feed into a sense of resignation. I
mm,
guess men don't like powerful women is one of them, right? Or I guess, you got to keep your guard up.
mm,
Or I guess you can't, it's not safe to ever be vulnerable. Like, we really,
mhm,
when we're hurt, and then things fall apart, we often come to conclusions that are not the wisest conclusions.
mhm,
So conclusions that are, healthier for us are conclusions like, well, it's not wise to give your power away. It's
mhm,
not wise to overgive as a way to source your value.
mhm,
Or it's destructive to try and just to chronically self-abandon in order to try and get certainty that someone won't leave you. Like, that's a deeper level of self-reflection that could really lead to moving from painful patterns to a sense of possibility that you could really have a healthy, loving, nourishing relationships, and kind of, have that pattern just become part of the memory of the past. So there is something to being able to self-reflect without moving into false conclusions, without moving into shame, without moving into self-blame or self-hatred, but really self-reflect on our own, how we co-created a dynamic or participated in a dynamic, and what needs to be corrected moving forward so that we can trust ourselves to not do that again, and to show
mhm.
up in greater alignment with the future we're committed to, greater integrity with ourselves, and actually with a sense of real hope and possibility for a future that would feel delicious
Mm.
for us to manifest.
No, I love that word,
Delicious.
delicious.
Yeah, me
Who doesn't want
too.
a yeah, who doesn't want a delicious relationship, right? Or
Yeah,
delicious
and delicious
everything.
over time, not just
Yes,
delicious in the first,
not
year
just
when
a
you're
nibble,
in the hormones of it.
right?
It's just like a really
I like
delicious
delicious, I mean,
relationship.
not just an amuse-bouche, not just an appetizer, but the full-on entree going forward in life. That's a
Yeah,
really
there you
beautiful way of
go.
putting it,
There
and,
you go.
so what would you say is the biggest obstacle most people face when it comes to relationships and that search for the one?
Well, in calling in the one, we really start out with, what would the miracle look like? And can you
Mhm,
actually set an intention? So you move from wishing and hoping that somehow, the universe is going to have a good day and take compassion on you and send you love. You go from that stage to, where God is some parent in the sky to the universe is your partner to
mhm,
co-create this future. So you see yourself as part of that miracle and how you're showing up and the choices that you're making. So the actions you're taking. So it starts with an intention for this kind of unprecedented, really unpredictable manifestation of what it is you desire to create. So if you're in a relationship and you're struggling, the intention would be we're going to have an amazing relationship where we
mhm,
break through the barriers to love, and love is the constant, and the co-creativity, the co-nourishment becomes a safe haven for us both. That would be like a great intention for a troubled relationship. And if you're looking for the one and you have these chronic patterns, you set an intention that, by my next birthday or by the end of the year, I'm going to be in a committed relationship with the person who is the highest and the best for me in this lifetime. We are loving together. The foundation of our relationship is respect. We like each other. We support each other. It is a fundamentally healthy, happy love. Like you just declare the future out of no evidence. You have lots of evidence to the contrary, but you start there because we want to get people into the space of having to rise and grow to be the possible self of that future fulfilled. And from there, Hilary, that's where we start to look for, okay, what's in the way? Like we're going to be Michelangelo looking for David. He's going to take away everything that's not David, right? So we're not
mhm,
trying to fix the past endlessly. We're actually committed to a future, and it's in service to that future. So the first things you want to look at is all the ways you're incomplete with the past. And there's a ton of ways we're incomplete with the past. If you have a resentment, a kind of
mm,
festering default, you go back to that ex, you go back to resenting your mother, you resent your older brother, you even resent yourself for choices you've made, then that means you're incomplete with the past. And not just incomplete, but you're victimized. You're victimized by what somebody else did. And a lot of us are even victimized by the limits of our own subconscious. Oh, there I go again. My low self esteem. I hate myself for doing that. So we have all this resentment built up. But here's the thing about resentment, if you are resentful, it means you are still powerless against the dynamic that was happening back then, which ultimately means you cannot trust yourself to get into another relationship because you know on some level that you're liable to do it again. So we have to get complete with the past by looking at, first of all, if you feel resentful, it's probably for good reason. Let's just assume somebody misbehaved, somebody has a personality disorder, somebody did what they shouldn't have done, they didn't do their best by you. Okay, all of that is true, is valid, you've got it correct. However, even if the other person's 97% at fault, you want to be so interested in your 3%.
mm,
How is it that that's the person that found their way into your bed? That's what I want to know. What does that so and usually the 3% is covert. I overgive as a way to prove my value, or I don't speak up because I don't want to rock the boat because I'm afraid the other person's going to leave and I'm not willing to take that risk. You have to look for the choices that you've been making. And a lot of us will go into that 3%, we'll go right into then being victimized by our own psychology.
Mhm.
Well, I can't really set boundaries because my mother never set boundaries or my father always went into it. And I say, no, no, no. You don't set boundaries because you're unwilling to risk that someone will be mad at you or someone will choose to leave. Go for the volitional component. We are all grown-ups in the room. So once you see your 3% clearly, I minimized the red flags. I wanted what I wanted, all of that stuff. Then you say, okay, what am I going to correct moving forward? What will I never do again? What will I always do from this? I will always listen to my intuition. I will always speak up and share my own feelings and needs. I will never again disappear myself or collude
Mhm.
when somebody puts me down, and just disappear into the wall in that moment. So you just have to really know what that 3% is so that you can make that promise to yourself and you can grow beyond it because that's where you will trust yourself to let love into your life. Okay, so that's part of completing the past.
That just hits so deep, and, as you're speaking, as you're sharing, I'm thinking of all the letters I wrote when I went back and I read Calling in the One Again. The letters were different, how I was writing them, how I was journaling. Everything was completely different from 10, 8, 10 years ago
Wow.
because of that 3% and the understanding,
Yeah.
It's powerful. It's really
Yeah,
powerful.
it's life changing.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, if you have had your heart broken, these crash and burn experiences that we
Mm,
have with people, they take a toll on us.
mm,
They can take a deep emotional toll. They can take a financial toll. They can take a toll on our children. They can make us sick, like all sorts of consequences to bad relational dynamics, bad relational choices. So that 3%, you have to be so committed to that that it really does, on some level, reconcile it. Because
mm.
when we're incomplete, we keep going over and over. That person owes me an apology. They need to see it. What we're trying to do is get that debt reconciled. And actually, we're the ones who need to reconcile it and make empowered meaning of it that changes our life moving forward so it goes into, the wisdom pocket. Like, okay, now I
Mhm.
have this wisdom. And now I understand more about how to set my life up in relationships so that I can create happiness and I can create happiness for myself and for others. So it becomes, a stepping stone to our happiness. And then in that regard, it's worthwhile.
Would you say or agree that once we have a better understanding of that 3% and we're more in alignment with ourselves, those kind of relationships that might have been toxic or might have not been serving us best won't even come into our space because we are not really bringing them in, the energy?
I think the fantasy is that when people do calling in the one, that the first person that they meet afterwards is going to be the new energy, the healthy person. They've written in their journals all the ways they're done with the past. But here's the thing: life can only evolve through us,
Mm.
meaning we have to make new choices. So what is predictable is that the next person you will meet will be some covert version of the old pattern that you might not quite see on the first date or two. But if you start to get really savvy, you will. And you have to keep choosing no. You
Mm.
have to keep choosing no. So for me, I remember, my one of my core patterns was going after narcissists because I,
Mm.
I I was raised by a narcissistic mom who has many good qualities, so it doesn't condemn her. She's a great person in many ways, but she does have narcissism, and so I typically then had the very classic thing: if I'm not good enough, which is very typical for mothers of
Yeah.
narcissistic for daughters of narcissistic mothers. And so one of the things, of course, when you have the I'm not good enough false center, is what we call it, your false love identity,
Mhm.
you tend to be very drawn to people who are very confident, right? Because you lack confidence. So you get very swept up in the confidence. Well, when I did the process of calling in the one, creating it as I'm going, but when I did it, of course, the first gentleman that I met was this wealthy, handsome, single, charismatic, attentive at first, kind of seductive person. And it wasn't until the end of the night, endlessly interesting. And it wasn't until the end of the night that I realized, oh, he talked about himself all night long. He didn't ask me one question about myself. And I was
Mm.
the perfect audience. And so when he reached out to me again, I blew him off. I, I just blew him off. I was not interested.
Yeah.
So you have to graduate. Even though, like, when I realized that I wanted to negotiate it, oh, maybe I could, well, let me just go out with him again and try talking about myself. And I was like, Catherine, don't even go there. Because if you really unpack, like, what had me choose that, 6 years down the road of being with a narcissist, if you really unpack it, like, when did you see that? And what were the choices you made when you first saw it?
Mhm. Mm.
What were the choices you made? You really tend to go back to the beginning, because the
Yeah.
beginning of the relationship, people do kind of lay out their hand. We start to make the compromises. You're negotiating the dynamics of the deal you're making
Mm.
together. Because, all relationships are a series of agreements, many of those covert agreements.
Mhm.
Right? So you have to graduate, Hilary. That's it has to happen through you. You need to make some choices. And eventually the universe kind of goes, "Oh, okay, course correct. We're going in a different direction."
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
right? And then you actually lose interest. Sometimes people say to me, "Oh, but the only ones who are interesting to me are the bad boys or and I'm like, "Yeah, do you know what the proper response is when somebody is, treating you badly? It's not to stand up for yourself, it's to actually lose interest." That's
Yeah.
the proper response. Just get bored. It's boring.
Yeah. And you don't really
Oh,
have
I know
time
how
for it. I don't have
I
time
know.
for this.
No, and if you're really up to something, you're
Mm.
really up to your own creativity, your own contribution, you're up to the life that your soul needs,
Mm.
knows that you have the potential to be living, you really do get bored with those dynamics. They are a distraction,
Mm. Yeah.
you know?
And distractions can be, I've talked about this with other colleagues that a lot of times when we are unhappy or we're not in a place where we're thriving, we go to those negative distractions that are just what they are. They pull us away from living powerfully, you know? So yeah, I totally hear you because I've been there with my own relationships and the narcissism. And I found myself in that first relationship afterwards, kind of having that like, my eye was kind of like, I don't get this. Something's weird about this. But you try to validate, you try to
Yeah.
make it work. You're like, okay, maybe I'm just not giving him a chance, or maybe I'm just not seeing things differently. But it's really the growth. It's like, girl, and then it clicks and you're like, yeah, I'm just not, yeah, you're just not healthy for me, or it's just not serving me well, or I wish you the best in your life, but it's not my life that will be shared with. um,
Yeah.
that's powerful too.
Yeah, you just have to make wise choices and
Mm.
start to find your way to that future. But that's why we like to start with the possibility, like, and part of the standing in the intention is a practice of visioning every day. What does it feel like to be with someone who I feel valued by all the time? What does it feel like to be in a dynamic that's fundamentally kind? What does it feel like to feel safe and inspired? A lot of people almost mimic safety and they feel dead.
Mm.
They create safety by not engaging things, but that's a dead field. That's not a really alive field. What does it feel like to tell the truth and to be received? What does it feel like to set a healthy boundary and love doesn't get taken away or you don't get punished? The other person can handle is mature enough to handle their disappointment and stay with you in the room and respect you enough to make that. So we have to become students of healthy love when we weren't raised with it. So I think so that's part of, some of the obstacles to love. I mean, in the calling in the one process, I go through several ways that we're incomplete with the past. But another big one, Hilary, is what I call your false love identity.
Mm. Yep.
And that's the core sense that we're kind of touching on, like who is the I at the core of I love you, and basically, particularly when when you feel disappointed or you feel insecure, or you start to feel like you need that person in some way, and the ways that we start to kind of carve slices off of our soul to stay bonded to someone, which are the I'm alone story because I was abandoned as a child,
Mhm.
or I'm not wanted because my dad always rejected me, or I'm not good enough, as we were saying, is a very common one. But there's about 22 of the default
Mhm. Mhm.
ones that we go to. I'm not safe, I'm not important, I don't matter is another big one. So their core sense of self that was formed in relationship to those who we depended upon when we were really so young that we didn't even have language. They live as a felt sense in our body, and
Mhm.
that's our template for interdependence. And so we will very often default, and that's where we begin to show up in ways that are meant to compensate for that. But what they end up doing is they enroll others in that story and duplicate the story and create validation for the story. They actually create evidence for the story. So, for example, if inside if I'm alone, I think everybody's going to leave me. So I want to avoid conflict like the plague because to me, conflict is the beginning of the end, right? So I never want to engage conflict. And so I'll just keep, going along with the flow because I am afraid. And even somebody's disapproval of me feels like a little mini abandonment. I can barely tolerate that. So what I end up doing is self-abandoning and self-abandoning and self-abandoning. So I'm kind of a shell of a person. And then the other person, there's no one there to love. Like they leave or I've become their doormat. And so they lose respect for me and they drift out of the relationship anyway. Otherwise, so or I'll um or as a preemptive strike at the first sign of conflict, I also might just kind of shut down my own energy, shut down my own heart because I'm certain they're going to leave. And then that kind of covertly signal them to leave. So we're constantly generating our stories. So we have to go back and name that story clearly and wake up to
Mhm.
what's actually true. So I'm a big fan of distinguishing the story of the traumatized self versus the story of the true self. The true self is that I came here to love and be loved,
Mhm.
that I have the capacity to learn the skills that will allow relationships to flourish, allow conflict to become an
Mhm.
opportunity to deepen love, that
Mhm.
I am inherently connected to everyone and
Mhm.
everyone to me. These are the truths, and actually begin to decipher then the new ways of showing up. So when conflict shows up, rather than shutting down or pushing away, I might pick up the phone and say, "Hey, we need to talk about
Mhm.
this instead." There's just a whole different set of how I show up when
Yeah.
I'm centered in the deeper truth. So I have to know myself enough to know what that default is and the identity that I default to and how to wake myself up so that I can come in and generate health in the connection.
Mm. And isn't it all about connection with
It is
self and others?
it is. That's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
That's it.
It I think the one thing that I truly gravitated to, especially the second time reading the book, was what you just said about the stories because we have these stories that we tell ourselves, like you mentioned, but we also have the ability to change the narrative, to rewrite, to start on a new page. And it doesn't mean we're forgetting everything that happened in our past, because that's what develops the story. But we need to figure out how to not use the story as, oh, this is so much a part of it. I guess this negative comes into place. But like what you said, it's learning from it and changing the narrative, because it's so easy to get stuck. It's so easy to allow our heads to go there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's almost like we do it in a breath, and any kind of disappointment.
Mm,
I mean, I find that the discipline, though, of asking yourself, sweetheart, what are you assuming is true right now?
mhm,
Right?
good.
And I'll do it now. Now I know to do it if I start to feel kind of depressed
Mm,
or I start to feel really anxious. I'll stop. I'll say, sweetheart, to myself, sweetheart, what are you assuming is true right now? And it might be that no one loves me. That's a default for me.
mm.
No one loves me. And I'll say, is that true, Angel? And then I'll say, how old are you? That's what I'll say for it. So, what are you
Ah,
assuming is true? How old are you, sweetheart? I'm 5, right?
mhm. The inner child,
And then
right?
I'll say, okay, honey, well, let me tell you what's really true about this idea that no one loves you.
Mhm,
Can I tell you what's really true about that? First of all, I love you. I love you. I want you, or whatever it is, you're safe with me, whatever she's feeling, I love you. And then you say, and a lot of other people love you, including the person you're upset with who's upset with you right now. Just because they're upset with you doesn't mean they don't love you. Right.
mhm.
So I talk to that part of me.
Yep, yep.
I have to soothe that part of me. A lot of times we think we're going to get over our beliefs. That means we're going to get rid of that part of ourselves. No,
Mhm.
you're not. Human beings are not really built like that. We're almost like trees. Trees never get rid of the inner rungs,
Right,
right? So
right.
we have those inner rungs all the time, and what will throw us back into that consciousness is usually some kind of a disappointment. And so we have to learn how to hold ourselves and mentor those younger parts of us to a more empowered meaning so that we can continue to generate our relationships from our wisdom, from our resources,
Mhm, mhm,
from a sense of power and resilience,
mm,
and
mm.
be generative of the future that we're committed to.
The question, is it true? I mean, the belief systems we tell ourselves, the not nurturing the inner child. I love that you speak to yourself and you call yourself sweetheart. That's beautiful, because really, who are we to love if we don't love ourselves first? And, yeah, I
Yeah.
gravitate to that because I started doing the inner child work a couple years ago, and it really does make an unbelievable difference, because who are we nurturing in that moment when we have that belief,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think if we're witness to that, it definitely can be an empowering moment with you yourself, and then how you view the world around you. So,
Well, I think we go into our relationships wanting to have obviously corrective experiences
mm,
from the wounds of childhood and obviously wanting to be healed in that relational field. But the mistake that we make is we assume that the source of healing is in the other person,
mhm,
but it's not. It's actually in our relationship with ourselves,
mhm,
where we are self mentoring and self healing, and we are creating a relationship within our own psyches with the wounded parts of ourselves that suffered that relational trauma, and in particular with the meaning that we made. So we're constantly correcting the meaning, and when we bring that skill into our relationships, then we can speak intelligently to our partner and set that person up really to do quite well with us. So I'm not constantly like the bottomless pit of my mother never saw me. So I'm going to constantly need you to see me, see me, see me, because that actually, if unless I'm doing that within myself, it's really setting the other person up to fail. And
mm,
and in a way, it's holding them hostage to that wound,
yeah,
like they're supposed to fix it. But as an adult, what I can do is I can say, look, I can't have this conversation right now because right now I'm overly identified with my 5-year-old. And all I can see is evidence for not how you're not loving me. So I need to take a break here and just connect with this part of me
Mm,
so that I can really, have a more intelligent conversation. And if I can do that, then the other person will say, well, what can I do for you? Like they want to help. They
how
just
can I support
organically,
you?
what can I do
Yeah.
for you? What can I support you?
Mm,
And I can say, well, I think for right this moment, it's to stop explaining, why you need to go away next weekend, because that's not actually helping. So if you can just, you know, even, just sit with me for a moment while I hold that part of me and maybe even remind me that you actually do love me and that, you going away has nothing to do with you not loving me because that's all I'm hearing right now. But the,
right.
the level of self-awareness and self-responsibility in that, it just builds friendship, really. And I find that with my partner, if I talk from my 5-year-old, that's where you get into defensiveness.
Mm,
Then he's going to just justify and come back with his version of it, and
mhm,
then you get into the power struggle. Like that conversation is so uninteresting to me. That conversation can do nothing but harm to both of you.
mhm,
And so we tend to stop it. Like if we're in that space, we just go, break time. Like we're not, that's not a valuable way to interact
mhm,
here. But if I can sit with it, whatever I'm feeling, and then speak to him from that deeper place of self-responsibility, this is the wound that it's going into. This is how I'm hearing this. This is the experience of that over here. And I'm talking about it in a way that's kind of connected to it, then all I do is just elicit like a river of love
mm,
from my partner who cares
yeah,
deeply, right?
yeah.
It's
You speak so eloquently and poetically, I have to say. I listen to what you say and what you write as well, and it just comes through in such a poetic way. So thank you for that because it resonates with me.
thank you.
Uh, and what you shared is it makes so much sense because we do tend to go into that defense mode. But I'm curious about something, and from what I've read and what I know about you, how important is spirituality with everything? Because you when you speak of an intention and manifestation and creative visualization, these are some things that people will see as woo-woo. They do still in this day and age, even though we're more open to it.
Yeah.
I love it. I resonate too. But how do we encourage people to be open to the possibilities of the manifestation, intention, creating that visual, declaring it, and putting it into their everyday life to manifest it?
Well, I think that sometimes, when I wrote Calling in the One, I wasn't well known. I lived in my little bubble, and I really was probably, I mean, I could feel, I'm very intuitive, so I could feel the
Mhm,
potential that it was gonna have an impact on a lot of people, but I was basically working with a handful of people. I was probably writing for my little tribe of 50,
mhm,
truthfully. So I didn't mind using all the metaphysics and the woo-woo stuff. By the time, I wrote Conscious Uncoupling, many years later, I think 10 years later,
mhm,
by that time, I'd been teaching thousands of people, and I knew that many people struggled with this.
mhm,
So, Conscious Uncoupling is written with the same concepts, but much more scientifically based, and all the kind of evidence of how our mindset and the possible self of the future. So I've been, studying things like Carol Dweck at Stanford University, or um, uh, um, Hazel Marcus from Stanford,
mhm,
who co-created with Paula Neurius this idea of the possible self of the future, and the studies that do indicate that when we stand for a future, we begin to try that future on and identify with that future, that we will show up in ways that generate that future. And so I am a psychologist by trade,
mhm,
so I do bring a lot of that neuroscience, I know you're a neuroscientist,
Mhm.
into the conversation now, because I don't think that this is for people on the fringes or in the New Age movement, or who are into metaphysics per se. But I do think it is something that we all want to start to master, because if you look at even our world, what's really missing for us is a vision of a positive possible future, and all of us inspired to begin to do whatever it takes or become who we would need to be in order to generate that future.
Mm.
And I see this in Hollywood a lot. I lived in LA for 30 years. I just moved to the Bay Area, but I still have a lot of friends in Hollywood. And I'm just kind of chronically disappointed at the lack of creativity in Hollywood. They keep
Mhm.
putting dystopian images of the future out into the world. And I think it has a lot to do with the collective resignation, or the collective somehow all the divisions that we're facing, and just how we're kind of collectively creating the world right now. So that's starting to change. I'm really happy to say I have been talking to some of my friends in Hollywood, and they are really, there's a whole bunch of folks on board with visionary programming, positive programming, programming that's dramatic and intense,
Mhm.
and has all of the elements of human drama, but is actually pointing the way to something a bit more, sunny, like a sunny future, a future that we are excited to leave our grandchildren's. So we are. So a lot of my work, like the larger picture of why I do what I do, truthfully, Hilary, is
Mhm.
not just because I like it when people find a boyfriend like that. I mean,
It's a
that's
little
like
deeper than
really
that.
nice. But it's really about how do we awaken
Mm.
our power to create a future that doesn't look like the past? How do we awaken our power to create a future that is kind of unpredictable from where we are standing? What are you standing to create? And how are you generating the fulfillment of that future, and not just kind of hoping and praying
Mhm.
that, some peace descends upon earth, but how do you become a co-creator of peace on earth? How do you generate that? So that's what I'm really interested in. And I think that you can look at that from all sorts of angles, but there's certainly enough evidence in the field of psychology, and even in the field of neuroscience, that what we anticipate is what we tend to create and show
Mm.
up to generate.
Yeah, definitely. It was a turning point for me too. Before I fell into the havening techniques, when I saw the change it created in my mind, literally,
Yeah.
I realized that this is something I want to share with others, because the power it had on me, not even in relationships, just romantic, but the loss of my father, and that feeling of abandonment that I hadn't really dealt with as a child, and coming back to that and being able to alter those thoughts, moods, and behavior, and release those good chemicals, and create the space for something really beautiful to manifest, because I understood it now. And I
Mhm.
understood the events and the traumas happened, but I don't have to live in the event and the trauma, right? The
Mhm.
landscape is different, the meaning is different. So I it really resonates with me, and I would think, one thing, just from going through this myself and being able to use myself as an example, almost a guinea pig to the book, is that there was something you said before it even got into the chapters, and it was tolerate. We need to be able to tolerate the in between time, which sat with me, because that's where it's always the hardest, I think, for people is, why isn't it happening? It hasn't happened yet. I've read the book, or here we are in the time of COVID, where even if you pick up this book right now, are you really that quick to want to go out and hop on a date when we're trying to be really careful and safe? So, what would you say to listeners to really tolerate that in between time?
Well, when I wrote that in the book, what I was talking about is this gap between who we've known ourselves to be, and who we have the possibility of becoming in service to the fulfillment of love. So for me, the gap was severe because I had this, I mean, years, Hilary of evidence of disappointments
Mhm.
and dramas and heartache, not just starting in my adult life, but going all the way back to when my father left when I was 10 and, I lost connection with him and all sorts of disappointments in love. So here I am, like, okay, I'm going to be engaged to a wonderful man who I respect, who I adore. He adores me. We have a fun relationship, an inspired, loving connection that lasts over time. We have this happy family. I mean, the gap was pretty severe, but I'm starting from I'm the source of that. This is not like something is going to just descend upon me. So, who would I need to be in
Mhm.
order to be in that relationship? And so in that inquiry every morning, the practice I engaged was to sit on a meditation cushion and to just imagine what it would feel like to have that love. What does it taste like? What
Mm.
does it sound like? What does it smell like? What is, really just getting it into my body as though it's now, and then asking myself three questions. What would I need to let go of in order to manifest this love? And listening for the answer. The second question, what would I need to begin to cultivate to prepare myself for this relationship? And listen to the answer. And what's my next step? So if you're listening to your own deeper knowing, we all know the answers to these
Mhm.
questions. If we
Mhm.
just sit with them, if you ask that question, you're going to know immediately, oh, I got to give up smoking, or I got to get rid of this clutter. Well, I think it's time to take my ex's photo off my desk, or, or how about I stop binge eating every night,
Yeah.
or it could be more subtle. I need to give up my resentment towards my sister,
Mm.
or I need to give up um, the constant tirade of self criticism, or I
Mhm.
need to give up self neglect. Like, we know when we ask, "What do I need to give up today?" and "What do I need to begin to cultivate?" Well, I need to get better at being patient with myself, or I need to get better at telling people what I feel, or I need to get better at setting boundaries.
Mm.
What's my next step? Well, I've had that book sitting on my nightstand, so I'm going to read a chapter of that book today. Right? So we know the pathway if we listen. So that's the gap, is letting go of the habit. Okay, so I'm not going to overeat today. What can I do instead? I don't even know what to do with myself. That's an in between time. Like,
Mm.
when I see myself with my partner, I'm fit, we're out hiking together. There's a gap between me sitting on this couch for 30 days watching television 10 hours a day eating bonbons, right? So,
Do they still make bonbons? I'm curious
all
because I
right.
could really go
All
for a
right,
bonbon.
Hershey's
No,
Kisses,
no, I'm all
okay.
about the bonbons. Bring
Oh,
those
you
back.
like
Those
them?
were good.
I'm gonna look for them online now, yeah.
I'm very curious now. But you're right. It's that what do I do that's positive with the time in between rather than
Yeah, well, how do I hold myself even though I don't quite recognize myself? Okay, I'm gonna go out for a walk
yeah,
then.
yeah.
Right? Because that's me co-creating this future. Like, I want to be walking with my partner, so I'm going to go out and walk today. And I'm going to, with my mask on, look people in the eye, smile with my eyes. I'm going to
Yes.
talk to my neighbors. I'm going to start to be the person I am in the future now. That's how we co-create that future, one foot in front of another. And initially, it feels like a pretty big gap. But if you start showing up little by little every day, and you see people starting to respond to you differently. By the way, I have known several people who have found their beloved during COVID. Okay, I just have to say that for those who are, kind of feeling a little deprived, which would be a very normal thing. I think that one of the silver linings is that those who are online dating are really seriously online dating, seriously looking. You've been in the house for 6 months by yourself. Now you kind of get, okay, I'm ready for a relationship.
Yeah.
So people are much more, some people are much more seriously looking and much more willing to commit. So it's not necessarily a bad time. Remember the days where swiping was like there's 1,000 chances for a date today. It's harder to choose. So it's focusing everybody. And,
Mm.
if you get serious, you can start a relationship with talking to someone every day, looking at them on Squadcast or Zoom or, some visual. So you have a visual and you can date, you can have online dates. And then at some point, if you want to meet, you get tested or you have a socially distant meeting. You go out for a walk 6 feet apart with your masks and get to know each other. But people are actually meeting and then getting together quite quickly um, and feeling very grateful. I've known several people.
That's
Yeah.
fascinating to me. I
Yeah.
have not done that. I've been meeting people through just by online, I would imagine just from, friends or just they were common, colleagues of some nature, because there is that little fear factor of, "Oh gosh, it's COVID right now as we're recording this," and that feeling of, "Well, if everybody's out there dating, then we're putting ourselves at risk." But you make such a valid point that in the last 6 to 8 months at time of recording, we are we are connecting more. I've been saying this constantly on TV appearances and with clients that social distancing does not mean social disconnecting, right? If anything, we are so
Beautiful.
fortunate to have the virtual age, the digital age, to be able to do what we're doing right now, right? That it actually adds an element to connection that we might not have looked at prior.
Yeah.
So I would imagine that's why it's creating these really powerful, positive relationships.
I think so. I think people are just, we're all humbled by this
Mhm.
experience.
Yeah.
And I don't like the term social distancing. It's all
Mm.
it is. It's physical distancing. What's
Mm.
happening right now is a deepening of our connections.
I sure hope so.
Yeah.
I would love to see this situation create something positive out of it. I continuously have been trying to find the positive and what are we learning from this? What do we value more? How can we grow? What's available to us that we never really thought of before because we've taken advantage of this go 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 mentality, We're slowing down a little bit and there's so much that we really can take away from this rather than saying I just want things to go back to normal. That's one thing I hear all the time and it's like there's no going back. What can we do to in a positive way go forward and take much like in relationships, take the nuggets from what we learned and grow and move forward, right?
Well, let's share with people something that you and I are probably both seeing, which is that when we work together, when we work with people,
Yeah.
people are going much deeper.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my gosh. I mean,
Mhm.
the classes that I'm offering now and what the conversations are 100 miles ahead of anything
Mm.
I've ever done before. And
I
I've
can
been
imagine.
working with people really since 2004.
Mhm.
So I've worked with tens of thousands of people at this
Yeah.
point, and it's been quite extraordinary and heartwarming. And good news is for all the women who've been like, "Where are the conscious men?" The men, when they share, they're just as conscious and deep as the women.
Mm.
They are just as present, self-aware, invested in their personal development. It's quite beautiful to see.
I'm loving seeing that. There's more vulnerability, there's more openness. Those are the
Yeah.
kind of conversations I wanna have anyway, whether you're a friend or the possibility of a relationship. Well, it's still a relationship, possibility of a more intimate relationship. It's beautiful to see that dance. And, maybe this is one of those positives that's coming out of this experience, is that we're creating the space and holding space for each other and ourselves, you know? Real quick, because I know we are well, I could talk to you forever, Catherine, let's be honest. You have the calling in the one, but then you mentioned briefly Conscious Uncoupling, which is a that that book that came out, the New York Times bestseller that Gwyneth Paltrow and Chris Martin, when they consciously uncoupled, I think that's the first time we really heard that term.
Yeah.
And how did that book come about, really?
Well, I mean, when I met Mark, he was such a miracle. And I was 42, 41 when we got together. And we got engaged and pretty quickly waited. The next year we got married. Then I gave birth to our daughter at
Mm,
43. Then I wrote a book about it, Calling in the One. It became a national bestseller. I started teaching. I opened a center in LA. We bought our dream home. I was living happily ever after to the hilt,
mm,
and had thousands of students come to me. So many things, so many blessings, one after the other. And then 10 years into the marriage, we divorced.
mm,
And it was kind of, shocking, as all divorces are. None of
mm,
us going into marriage think we're going to wind up on the wrong side of that 50% divorce divide. But it really was the deepest truth that Mark and I had together. It was kind, it was conscious. We cared about each other. We both had had parental alienation
mm,
from one of our parents when we were growing up due to a divorce. He lost connection with his mother. Lost connection with my father. So we were very clear we wanted our daughter to have a happy childhood and post-divorce childhood. So we very tenderly divorced. We divorced with a lot of with a big commitment, really, to do right by each other, to create cohesion for our daughter, to create a happy post-divorce family.
mhm,
And we did it quite well. And so I decided to write that down. And that ended up becoming the program of conscious uncoupling. When Gwyneth got wind of it, it was because she was working with a therapist who was following my work,
mhm.
and I had been teaching it online, and ended up writing the book after she popped it into the lexicon. But it is a very elegant, truthfully, 5-step process of how to do the least amount of damage um, during a separation,
Mhm,
and to stay very mindful of the future that you're committed to creating as you're going through a time that predictably kind of unleashes a lot of fear, a lot of insecurity, a lot of anger, a lot of very big raw emotions that can very often take us out. And even those of us with good intentions will start to behave reactively and badly during that time and create karma that then we have to live with for years to come. So it's a way to actually do that elegantly and well. And I'm very pro marriage, but I'm not pro misery. And Happily Ever After was created when the lifespan was less than 40. And so, as we revise our eating habits and our exercise programs and how we educate our children according to how times are changing, we also have to update how we end relationships.
mm.
We're kind of not biologically designed yet to separate from each other, which I think is an evolutionary hybrid. Because if you wandered away from your tribe 1,000 years ago, you probably would die. And so we still have those feelings that we're going to
Yeah.
die. We go into fight or flight. We want to go from having a positive bond to a negative bond. That's the soulmate to soul hate bond, because hate is just as strong a bond as love. So we really have to mindfully shepherd ourselves through this process to not harm our kids or harm our chances for love moving forward. And that's what conscious uncoupling is.
I yeah, I wish I had that book when I was going through it. Doesn't mean I can't read it now, right? But
Yeah.
it's definitely finding a new way of relating that I mean, it probably can be used even outside of just intimate relationships, I would imagine. There's little
Yeah, it
nuggets in there.
can. And it's
Yeah.
really written for just the sole person who wants to be at peace. It's not
Mm,
necessarily about, or only for people like Gwyneth and Chris, who are
mm,
probably going to divorce well anyway.
mm.
It's really for people who are suffering with a heart that doesn't seem to be getting less hurt,
Yeah.
uh, a heart that's really still broken, or if you're kind of unresolved rage and anger, or ways that you now feel shut down to new relationships. So it's for the person who has been deeply hurt and needs a way to process that pain that's going to lead to wisdom, lead to healthy lessons learned, lead to growth and graduation and leave them more capable of loving on the other side of heartbreak.
And there's definitely love on the other side of heartbreak, isn't there?
Well, there's more love. I mean, because usually if you've gone through a heartbreak, some kind of toxic pattern in a
Mm.
relationship, it's because you've been repeating old painful patterns and it's time to graduate so that you can actually experience for the first time, I think, real love. I mean, when I 5 years after I wrote Conscious Uncoupling, I decided that it was time to call in the next one. That's when I called my partner in now, and I've really never been happier in love ever. And I'm in
Oh,
my 60s. He's in his 70s, but we're so happy. But a lot of it has to do with I know so many things now because I've been able to learn those lessons, and I do know much more how to love someone than I ever did.
I love hearing that. My mom actually met her husband online, and he was 80 and my mom was 70.
Aw,
And they're like a success story, and I think there's no end to when love manifests and can happen, and my mom was married a couple times, but to see 2 older seniors holding hands, loving in the moment, and not replacing the love they had. They both had
yeah,
children and relationships, but creating a newness and knowing that it could happen in any stage of our lives, kind of like what you're sharing about your own life. And I'm very confident that it'll manifest for me again because I've been doing the work and learning. And I just to those listening out there on holistically speaking, it exists. It exists and it's there. Just just do your work and you'll graduate. Right?
yeah.
Graduation is there. But I love talking to you, Katherine. Thank you so much. Here's I know that our listeners can't see this, but this is my journal that I wrote in.
Oh,
I
isn't that a
love this
beautiful
journal. Yeah,
journal?
beautiful journal. I'll take a picture of it to show our listeners.
Mhm.
But Calling in the One is your book. The one thing I would love to close with, and I do this with my listeners, is I do a rapid fire just to have a little fun with my guests, and then we'll do a
Okay,
closing thought. So I'm gonna
okay,
throw out a word,
okay,
word association, and then just come back to me with the first word that comes to mind.
okay.
You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Stories,
Books,
intention,
love,
victim,
blame,
love,
happiness,
awakening,
mine,
healing,
yours,
spirituality,
ours.
the one.
Gratitude.
Hmm. Well, I love ending on gratitude. You don't have to ask me twice. So I love that. It's so fun to hear what people say, and I say this in every podcast. I'm like, I don't come up with those prior. I do it as we're talking, and I find
Ah,
little nuggets
sweet.
that I want to talk about. But if you were to leave listeners with sage advice from yourself, from Katherine Woodward Thomas, what would that be?
Well, I think one of the things excuse me, one of the things I'm really wanting people to consider is that the technology of transformation
Mm,
is different than the technology of healing. And that some of the wounds that we suffered, the relational wounds of not being wanted or not being loved in the ways that we needed to be, um, of the past, we will be healing those tender spots within us for the rest of our lives. But that doesn't mean that you can't have a complete transformation and have happy love, healthy love, joyful love come into your life right now. You do not need to have all your wounds healed to be perfectly capable of manifesting deep joy and happiness and love right now.
you were looking right at me when you were saying that, and that was really beautiful, and I felt that. So
Mhm.
thank you for sharing that, and I can only imagine that others felt that as well. Thank you for sharing who you are. Thank you for being here. Katherine Woodward Thomas, she is the woman behind Calling in the One, 7 weeks to attract the love of your life, as well as Conscious Uncoupling. And I highly recommend picking up these books, especially Calling in the One, because it really is a very easy way to get started in that manifestation process and getting to know yourself. It definitely helped me. So thank you for your gift and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks, Hilary, for having me.
You can learn more about Katherine, her books, and her workshops by visiting her website. The link is available on the podcast page. And if you're ready to turn your traumas into triumphs and work with me personally as your guide on your healing journey, let's set up a free discovery call. Just connect with me on my website at hilaryrusso.com/havening. And you can also reach out to me on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at Hilary Russo. I'd love to hear from you. Holistically Speaking is produced by Alan Seals with music by Litbone Redding. Connection is everything, my friend, and aligning with you is exactly why I'm here. You're not alone. So thanks for listening. And until next time, be kind to your mind and don't forget to laugh.